Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on achieving organizational goals. Our presenter is Claude Melly and I'll hand over to him in a moment. But just before that, I want to very quickly run you through some housekeeping rules. The slides and the recording for this entire webinar will be available on our SlideShare page to view and also on our YouTube channel. When the webinar finishes, a small survey will pop up and I would ask that you please spend just a minute to give us your feedback. As you're listening to Claude's presentation, you might have some questions to ask. And if you look at the bottom of your control panel, you'll see a little questions box. This is where you can communicate with us. And if you type your questions in there, then Claude will allocate some time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. And that's all that remains for me to say to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the polls. I'm just introduce Claude very, very briefly. He is the Managing Director of MIT Consultants. Sorry, I just can't read the screen. It is a consultancy and education practice servicing international clients in change management. And he's also the chairman of a business solutions company. So over to Claude.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for being online, and I welcome you to our Achieving Organizational Goals. And I'd like to share with you during this next half hour or so some of the issues and challenges that we all have as managing any portion of the organization, and sharing with you the different experiences and exposures I've had in the field of management. Please do note your questions as we go through the whole slide set. We have some colorful slides. I will not be reading off every slide because you'll be receiving those at the end of our webinar. There's some salient points. I'll be talking over the slides. So if you have the opportunity of noting some of these salient points, that'll be good for me. The key thing is to understand that we're going to be looking at the ways that we're going to be achieving organizational goals. There are many things that we have to consider, and let's picture the ideal. We create an organization, be it private or public, and there are many things I would like to have as perfect. For example, our organizational structure, well established, well distributed. We have great people, excellently trained, excellent competences. We have processes that are perfect, smooth. We have great facilities. We have great clients, great customers. They're happy. They love our products and services. Our supplies are wonderful. They're on time, highest quality. We have a market dominant position and our competitors are really weak. We have no regulatory norms. We have stability in socioeconomic and geopolitical. What a beautiful, ideal picture. Now, let me ask you a question here. If this is, this is your current situation, I'm asking you, what are you actually doing here? Thank you for being here, by the way. This was just a teaser to be able to provoke your mind. Nothing is stable, nothing is static, nothing is perfect for a long time. And a long time could be a day, a week, a month. There are many industries which are constantly in a volatile state. The challenge behind that is that we know we are going to have change. So I will call upon a person that everybody has heard of, old Charles. And the species in this particular case, obviously, is our organization. And how do we adapt to a changing environment? Now, there's an anonymous person who gave a lovely little sentence here. And, it's a question of speed. So in our webinar, what I'd like to go through, and this webinar is a lead-in to the major seminar that I will be holding in end of September here in Dubai with Informa, because I have the great pleasure of conducting many seminars for Informa throughout the whole year on management of change, management of projects. So I'll be very happy to welcome you in person at these future seminars. So what we're trying to look here are some of the realities that we all face today, and how can we be effective in the change that needs to be affected in both our strategic and organizational points of view. Thank you for responding to the poll. And we have a good cross section of upper management and middle management and entry management. And so some of you who have been in higher levels of management will have certainly come across many of the challenges we have. And I hope that you can share this with the rest of your teams and for the other levels of management. Let's take a view, first of all, on what are the major challenges of any organization. So the big black circle in the middle tells us this is what we have to look for in any organization. How can we sustain our operations, be it private or public, it's not important as an organization. And how can we make sure that that sustainability allows for continuous improvement? This is the bread and butter, shall we say, of any organization. Meanwhile, we have to be proactive and engage in what could happen in a short-term future, a few weeks, a few months, and long-term. There are 6 boxes around there, different colors, that say what is the organization doing in making sure that internal changes that do evolve because of the inherent characteristics are analyzed, like the markets, like the competition, like our processes, like obviously our competencies and skills, and how do we make investments. Now, all these things, one good thing that we are on top of and we manage. However, on a day-to-day basis, many things do occur which make us have to change. Meanwhile, that's the orange circle on the top right. There are so many external influences that we cannot really believe that we are living in a stable environment. Change is the only certainty we have, and it's in a world of uncertainty. So that makes it rather challenging. So how do we actually approach these things? Well, better to be proactive than to be reactive. Reactive, you have your back to the wall. Proactive, at least you can guide some of your destiny, if I can use that word. Okay. What we are looking for is value creation in any organization. All right. Some of that value is easily measurable, maybe in private organizations, but the value as well is measurable in public organizations. We want to meet the goals, so that means we have to establish the goals, and the goals that we're trying to achieve are both, shall we say, strategic, transformational. We are doing things differently by creating new products and new services, or we are looking at our tactical operational assets to see if we are maintaining and sustaining the way that we perform work. So 3 major blocks: sustaining continuing operations, maintaining a competitive advantage, and seeking the growth and opportunities. Now, that requires, on one side, being on top of what we know how to do and seeing how we can better ourselves and how we can create new opportunities in an environment which is very dynamic. There's a lot of management of change, and this is just an extract of what change management requires, and it requires the participation of the whole of the organization. However, it has to be guided by a shared vision and a shared need and the leadership into change, be it just to modify a small internal operational process or to introduce a completely new corporate way of doing things in the organization. 2 key questions that are always on everybody's mind, and I have them there right up on the blue box. Are we doing the right thing? And are we doing the thing right? It's a perpetual question that has to be asked in order to be ahead and not below our line of, shall we say, existence. Are we doing it right? Right product, right market, right projects, right skills, right investment? Many operational issues come out. There is waste. There are many places where waste exists. A lot of costly steps, low quality, inadequate response. So there has to be this continuous evaluation, not only by measuring daily, weekly, monthly reports of where we are in operations or whatever. We need to have something which goes beyond that, anticipates. And we have to look at opportunities. So all these things, all in all, bring us to have to use what I would call classical models of how do we generate goals from our missions and visions, and how are these going to be incorporated into a strategy, which I remind you is an original military term, which is kind of a high-level plan, and to consider the structure and the systems and the processes, and of course the people who are going to participate. The model which is based upon the management by objectives is the one that sets up a mission, sets up objectives on the mission, and the objectives are broken down into strategy and then to tactics. So there's a top-down approach, and you can read there what a mission and objectives could be, moving from a qualitative view of things into something very quantitative, and eventually the tactics is this is what has to be done at a very discrete and modular level. So that's the approach we need to have. It's very structured, and it requires obviously to be distributed across the organization. And all parts of the organization would need to have some form of strategy formulation. We often tend to think that strategy is only in the hands of upper management, which is correct for the general business of that particular organization. However, strategy and goals are also needed at the operational level. We'll be looking at that together. And many ways are available for us to develop that. However, they all will begin with understanding our current situation, understanding the environment we are, and understanding the impacts that this will have in the current organization, and to create a situation where we go from where we are today, and I'm sure a lot of you have met the as is terminology, where we are today, to where we want to be tomorrow. So the way we want to be tomorrow, visions and missions, are, shall we say, aspirations. However, those aspirations have to be converted to something more tangible so that all those who participate actually go through there. So we need to select how to get there, establish a roadmap, a blueprint of how we can get there in consideration of a variety of factors which will contribute to that success, and then put it into place, actually do some work and go live where we'll be at the new desired situation. This could be over a week, this could be over a month, this could be over 5 years. Obviously, the longer the time frame between that fictitious point A and fictitious point B, the more the time frame is longer, the greater are the potential changes within the change we're trying to establish. So that's going to be a very, very important thing to consider. And the levels of strategy, as I was mentioning before, are not only the corporate level. Obviously, the corporate level has just imagine that you're on a very large cruise ship, and basically at the corporate level, we are on the bridge, and we see how our 50,000-ton cruise ship is going, where it's going to go, and how it's going to go. And but below that, we have different business units. And business units usually are more autonomous. They are profit and loss, and they will have also their own strategies because they may well be able to fund it. And also they will have their own departmental breakdowns to a functional level. As you get down to the functional levels, you are much closer to the coal face, shall we say, where work is being performed, and that's the sustainability of operations. So all these three levels will be addressing their strategies. Obviously, we'll be seeing that later on from the corporate level strategy. It will trickle down to the business units and then down to the functional levels, which will create some form of, so we say, friction, because if there's some functional level strategies at the operational level, shall we say, I need to review my power consumption because it's getting too high, that would be a change I want to make in my operations. If that has to be connected to a corporate level strategy, well, I may not have the actual resources or the time frame to do both. So there's going to be some friction there to be resolved. We'll challenge that in a few slides' time. Now, in order to get our strategy understood, we have to have something which is tangible to be measured. And I'm sure you've all come across the SMART model. I must just say that the consultant who developed the SMART model must be making a fortune if he's got royalties, by the way. But anyway, so it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound, and there are many perspectives. So you have, in fact, a multi-pronged SMART objective set, which tangibilize, doesn't seem to be a very good English word, that one, but you make tangible what you're going to try to achieve in order to fulfill the goals within the strategy. So that is a high level picture. So each particular part of the organization is going to try to establish these things. And some of them may be more financial, some of them may be more, shall we say, infrastructural, some of them would be increasing the efficiency of the workforce. So there are many, many ways of addressing our needs by establishing smart objectives. Now, there's a couple of words here which are very important for us to understand. Is this transformational? It used to be called business process reengineering at some stage in its life. And in fact, you transform how you're doing things and what you are doing, in fact, in from one state to another. And it's rather drastic sometimes, like business models change or product ranges changes. Now, if you are in that situation, you need to address at least these 6 major blocks which I have over here, because they're going to affect the whole organization, the business units, geographies, the functions, and care must be taken in establishing at least the first feasibility studies and any other analysis that you need to do. So that would be where the transformational changes would happen, usually guided from upper management, because they would have obviously the hands on the wheel to guide the organization to where it will be in the future. I remind you, Einstein said something like, the future already exists, but we haven't got there yet. So it's quite interesting. But we can't ask him to explain that, unfortunately, because he's no longer here. In fact, I think they still keep his brain somewhere in some form of a metal container or something. Now, in order to do anything, we need funding, we need money. So I'd like to remind you the big difference between the CapEx budgeting, which is basically what we're going to do to acquire assets which will be employed and deployed in future for the organization. My take on CapEx is I have a dollar, I put it on a table, and I want a dollar plus later on. So I'm going to invest for the organization to achieve its missions and visions and the goals, but over a time period. And that will actually be implemented throughout the organization. So CapEx is very important. One statistic I've had from many sources is that organizations who have CapEx in multi-million dollars and billions of dollars, it seems that they actually spend that amount of money within one financial year, but they only achieve about maximum 65% of the work that needs to be performed in that financial year. So it's about 35% of CapEx budget, which just goes down the drain. So just imagine if you have a $10 billion CapEx, you're putting $3.5 billion down the drain. Now, I'd like to be the other side of that drain, mind you. So that's the CapEx. And you may also know about the OPEX. Now, each particular functional manager on a yearly basis fights for about between 6 weeks and 3 months to get the budget. And the budget is to actually employ the resources, human, materials, equipment, to achieve the operational goals. Excuse me. Now, within that OPEX budget, they will also need to think about not only the sustaining and the continuing improvement of the organization, but also they may well have to have their own change projects included in order to enhance and maybe better the way they operate. So OPEX and CAPEX are going to be the funding sources of change and achieving goals. Strategic objectives, just as a reminder, we're talking about medium to long term. They're translating the organization's directions, operational objectives developed by business units, functional units, and they really are focusing on the operational needs of that organization. So the major challenge here will be when both sets of objectives are competing for the same time frame, same resources, and obviously for similar types of sources of funding. Excuse me, I just took some water there. So that can be represented where you have corporate strategic strategies being established, and they are going to be touching upon or any of these or all of them. So it may well be a new product will be launched or a new service, or one is reviewing a whole of an IT infrastructure, or maybe the human resources need to be reskilled because of entering of a new market. So that would be a corporate initiative, okay? But it will have an impact, obviously, the operational and functional level. So these are things that have to be synchronized, or else we are going to fail. There's a very large percentage of failed projects, by the way, because the instrument of change, as I've been obviously talking about change, is projects. Eventually, there are programs and projects which are the ones that actually make the change of situations. There are a lot of percentage of projects that do not actually achieve what they are meant to achieve. And there are many reasons for that. And I invite you to my other strategic project management courses if you want to wish more to know more about that. Okay. So when we have our strategy and operations between the long-term views and the short-term impacts, um, since the operational entities, they concentrate on their ability to perform according to measurable criteria have been set for the actual calendar and financial year, looking at costs, looking at quality, looking at response time, dependability, and so on. The strategic goals will come on top of that, and that could sometimes be productive to what we're trying to achieve in an organization. That also has to be looked at, because operational goals will be those which are specific to that entity. And they will be looking at how that is going to be performed across their departments, what resources, internal and external, would need to be performed, taken away from the resources that are actually maintaining and sustaining whatever operation has to be done. And how will we achieve the goals? Can it be done within one calendar year, financial year? This is the budget year, or will it stretch over more than one financial year? And that is an operational issue. And it's very close to maintaining and sustaining how the organization actually functions. So planning to be done. And in order to establish goals, we need to see how that's going to be established from a multiple point of view. Top down, that's from corporate strategy, we've talked about that. Bottom up, that would be from operational challenges that are met on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis. There will also be lateral, okay? They will come from the market, they will come from, be it from competition, from evolution, from regulatory norms. They could be as well from suppliers who are come in or come out, or their innovations. And so we say the resources and their capabilities. So the strategies that are being built at the level of operations consider a multitude of forces. And these have to be planned so that we can then determine whether or not we can achieve these goals. The pity would be to set goals that are unrealistic just because goals have to be set, but we don't have the way of actually achieving them. So once we have those plans in operation, and they are linked to strategic goals, all right? And as you can see in the yellow box, obviously we should have things which are clarified at the beginning, objectives that are set, what kind of quality standard we want, and the outcomes we'd like to have, so that benefits can come out of that particular change in the operational plan. And in many cases, one would have extra work to be performed in order to enhance the operation in its goals. And these kinds of actions, these projects, can and will be funded by additional money budgeted for the operation. So one should not just stay on the budget that's been given, because funding is required, and if one needs to enhance an operational capability, one needs to change things or add things, and that will require extra funding to the funding normally allocated to the operation of a department or a functional group. The tactical plan for actions will be broken down from the strategic level from which they came from. So we have a business strategy that will be broken down. So the more we break down things, the more we can actually identify the activities that need to be performed, the costing of them, and we can actually then, through obviously project management techniques, schedule, plan, and measure risks, and so on and so forth. So there are different types of tactical plans one can actually establish, and these need to be coordinated so that they are not at all in conflict with each other. Now, in implementing any form of change, one would also need to ensure that whatever change is being performed, we can evaluate its evolution. Okay, so what are the necessary means so that we know that we are on a track? There's not a straight line into the future. Okay, all plans are not what is going to happen. Plans is what we want to happen, and they are filled with obviously a lot of assumptions, a lot of risks to be addressed, and a lot of factors which are outside of our control. So as far as the way to move forward, one needs to have leadership, making sure objectives are well understood, making sure that the allocation is appropriate for the work to be performed, the funding that be performed, that there are skills in the organization that can accept change within change. I mean, that sounds maybe crazy, but if I want change to happen in an environment of the future, that environment is not under my control and can change. So the change that I want to happen will actually be performed in an environment of change. So a mentality of dynamics, of being able to adjust the journey that we're making, and that will be through the monitoring that we have, so that we can adjust as we go through. Just imagine you are in a sailboat and you believe you're going to be crossing an ocean as a straight line. Well, I think you should be changing your particular maritime skills or career. So there are a lot of performance measurements that we need in order for us to ensure that we are on the track to meet the goals, which could eventually be slightly adapted and modified depending on external events. I don't need to remind everyone here of what happened in 2008, nor, if I can also remind for those much closer, at the back end of last year when the barrel of oil was over $100, and then everybody made their plans, and now it's, I think today it was 64.5 or something, having gone down to 45. So we have to adjust and amend depending on circumstances that are outside of our control. So we need to have measurements, but those measurements are not to be able to put the blame on anything or to say we made a wrong decision or a right decision. It's to understand our progress. And project management are great skills to have in order to be able to schedule and to plan, to understand assumptions, to understand how we are going to perform work, how it interacts internally to the organization. But it also has to have the ability to change and to change plans, to change schedules, to reallocate resources, to be able to have a variety of techniques that can identify that we are still going to the goal, but maybe we are zigzagging through time and space. And it's very important to set that in place without it being a climate of fear. A lot of people fear to make wrong decisions. Well, my take on that is all my decisions are wrong because they're not 100% correct. I want to concentrate by how much I'm wrong, and that's where I'm going to be able to navigate. So these are things that, by creating this environment of dynamics, achieving organizational goals is met with a higher degree of success because people are willing to adapt and to modify. And the planning for it is important because the involvement of individuals on the same line of thought, stakeholders, communication of the different visions. So people understand that as we're moving forward, we are moving within the organization for the benefit of the organization. And that allows us to have a series of change projects, be them at the strategic level, the business level, departmental level, that will in their totality help the organization to be a better place to actually perform and be successful. However, one must remember that if we launch too many projects at the same time of change and they come in conflict with each other, and we find ourselves that they spring up like mushrooms after a rainy day in a forest, we will not get what we would like to achieve. So there is something else that needs to be introduced in the organization in order to achieve organizational goals. And that will be within the whole pyramid that we have here, where we have the vision, the strategy, the tactics. And at lower levels, we have the projects, which will be either strategic or business driven or departmental driven. We have to have what is called a project portfolio management system, which is answering the question, are we doing the right thing? The right thing being, does it meet the goals and does it align to the strategies we're trying to achieve? If we don't have that dark blue little part of the pyramid, many projects are launched, we are overusing resources, we may not be finding ourselves with the correct funding, we may not have results which interact with each other. In fact, they may be in conflict with each other. And in the end, at the top of the pyramid, management is asking the question, how come we're spending so much time, spending so much money with goals that we've identified, and they seem to be late, or they seem to be overrun, or it's costing us a fortune, or when they actually do get delivered, it is not responding to our operational business benefits? Good question. So there is also, on top of the planning that has to be done, the strategic direction that we have to set, and all the other items I've mentioned, we need to have a funnel, a process is called in the project selection, where we are rigorously selecting those projects that best serve the interest of the organization at the high level, which is corporate and therefore strategic, and at each lower level, at the different operational levels. Okay, and that will lighten the amount of conflicts one would have, because I have not seen any organization in my experience that has unlimited resources, unlimited funding, and unlimited time. So choices have to be made. And in order to achieve organizational goals, those choices are tough, but they need to be made so that what comes out of the funnel has business benefit. And with that, expectations of those benefits are going to be, shall we say, clear. However, they evolve. Huh? And that's what I was saying before. We're managing change in an environment of change. So there's also the attitude and the culture of accepting change within a change. So there are stakeholders in every organization, obviously in projects. There are a lot of things that happen outside of the organization that actually modify expectations. There's an evolution within an organization. Maybe the organization grows. Maybe it will acquire another business. Stakeholders come and go, or maybe original data on which were based the strategies have evolved, and so we have to adjust the plans accordingly. And that's the key in achieving organizational goals. You adjust so that you can meet those goals appropriately for the benefit of the organization. And to achieve that success, because we go from old to new, number one, realistic plans. Now, realistic means it is something that has been assessed and analyzed, that we can do it within a certain degree of accuracy. Okay, and there are changes that are compelling. Okay, it could well be that we have a lot of waste in an organization, or that our competitors are having better services or products. So these will be compelling changes. We want to have leadership. Strong leadership meaning the belief in the change and the understanding of a culture of dynamics. And middle management are owning a lot of the change because from the strategic point of view, especially transformational, this will trickle down the divisions and the different departments and the different functional groups, and they have their job as well. So middle management must have that ownership, not imposed on it, however, must understand that it is contributing to the success of the organization. And ongoing communication, obviously, so that everyone in the organization is aware of whatever changes have to be made, certainly for the transformational. I leave it up to the functional groups within their own, shall we say, microcosms to make sure the communication is wide. And some resources which actually can support at the employee level whatever changes are made in their day-to-day work, because that's going to happen. We also need to measure that progress and the progress continually and adjust. I think I've made that point clear enough. Now, if you want to fail, very simple, right? What you need to look at, there he goes. Okay. How well and badly the organization responds to the change. That's it. That's it. No response or slow response. And there are many, many organizations of the last 10 years, and you can name it, certainly in technology, that have been so slow and laggard in responding to change. I mean, just think about the mobile phone industry, and there are two names that will come to your mind immediately. Okay. Plus also what happens internally. So that's one thing. Do be responsive. Do accept that things are going to need constant review. If you are on top of your industry, if you're on top of your product and you're number one declared by some poll, change. The best changers are the ones who are number one, because there's always going to be a two or a three behind, and they're going to be snapping at your heels. No support. Very quickly hashed up strategies without sufficient analysis, without sufficient feasibility studies. People are the key. Most organizations today have a large percentage of their staff are knowledge workers. These people have great things to bring to the table. Let them participate, okay? And do not stifle innovation. Do not stifle creativity by creating a climate where people are afraid of taking risks, because moving into the future and making change happen is risk, and that creates potential for failure. There's nothing wrong with failure if you know why and you learn from it, as long as it doesn't cost you, of course, a fortune. A lot of priorities will certainly be, if they shift, deflect our efforts. Now, that back again to the higher levels of the management, be it at the corporate level or the intermediate levels, take time, assign people to assist to understand what kind of priorities are required, or else it's oh, Monday I do this, or Tuesday I do that, and eventually you never get anything done, and the employees get very, very tired about this, because people want success. People really want success. There are a lot of difficulties in defining the best process projects. Okay, so do a funnel. Make sure your criteria is makes common sense, makes good sense. Okay, look at how operational activities are distracting potentially. So you don't want to overload individuals. So you get on one side, your operation is no longer sustainable because people are trying to work on operations and programs of change, which take away their resources, and the program of change also do not succeed. And that silo behavior in every organization means that you cannot have collateral exchanges. You have to have bilateral communication. Excuse me for that. There's going to be politics, that's for sure. However, those who protect their turf, basically their particular area, are going to close the door to integrated changes across the organization. And don't just give orders. Command and control, command and control. People are the key resources of the organization. Change can only be made through people. And if you are any manager from first line supervisor to CEO. Let me share with you what I learned a very long time ago with my first management experiences. It says that your goals and the objectives that you set can only be achieved through the efforts of others. Thank you. I hope that you have enjoyed this. How long was that? About 30 minutes, 35 minutes. I hope it wasn't too boring and nobody's gone away. We have a session now of questions. So we have many questions that have come in, and one of the questions that we have got is from Iftikhar, and I believe that question has been lost. But one of the questions we have received is how do we get from a current situation today of organization that may not have strategic goals well set to one that is being set? Now, that's a very tough question, in fact, because there are cultural issues in many organizations, and certain organizations may not distribute the strategic goals sufficiently enough to the middle management to then not only break them down in how they will perform these at their levels, but there's no feedback. One of the things that I would suggest to you is that you have to have a feedback loop. It's nice to have strategic goals. And I always say to people, top management make decisions when you're not there, which is correct. However, top management needs to know as early as possible if the decisions, especially for strategic goals, can be achieved by breaking them down and waiting for a response from the lower levels of the organization so that they can map against that particular initial strategy. So up and down, it is not a top-down way of doing things. You have at the higher level, even at the departmental level, you have a goal you would like to achieve or has to be achieved. It has to be discussed with other members of the staff. Those members have to participate to bring in to the table their comments and their remarks. They have to see that you integrate that and adapt and modify the goals if possible. Okay, so that would be one of my key points. Thank you, Guan, for the wonderful webinar. Raju just asked me a nice question. Does culture could be a barrier, accelerator to execute strategy, especially in the Middle East? Very difficult question. I hope this is not recorded because I may be thrown out of the country. Obviously, culture is a major issue in how organizations are set because organizational cultures, except for multinational companies, are reflections of the national culture and the hierarchy. So you will find that decision making in certain types of cultures would be mostly top down. So I appeal to these cultures to understand that top down is good to set direction, but the best way that everybody takes the direction is for individuals to speak up. Now, with all the diplomacy and all of the formality one needs when one talks to a higher level management, depending on which country you are, but you need to have, especially in the Middle East, from my take on it, is a feedback loop. There are respects for organizational levels. There are respects, of course, for authority, which is great, and I really belong. However, those who are going to be implementing change need to voice as early as possible with substantiated, shall we say, facts to management about certain things that may or may not be possible. But you have to substantiate. Don't wait until the last moment because you're afraid of seeing top management and telling them this and this and that. Management wants to hear you early. They might not like it. But if you progressively do that, you'll find that the goals that are set in a particular culture, which is, shall we say, top down, can be met in an easy way. And that's the culture of the industry. And I think in certain parts of the Middle East, they are much more flexible now to engaging, shall we say, the lower levels of the organization. Now, I may be wrong. I'd like to know your opinions on that. We have another nice question. Can you share with us an example of a feedback loop, a real example? Well, I'll just mention here. Let's say I'm a manager of a division and we need to be able to revamp our manufacturing. And because we're going to have to increase our manufacturing capacity and might need to have a new manufacturing plant, for example. So I'll make my decisions. I may have my consultants helping me, and the feedback loop with sharing that with my supervisors, my engineering bodies, my R&D, whatever other entities I need, and they will come back to me with a more of a detailed plan. They might tell me, you know what, in order to have this particular plant, we need to have land, and to have land, we have to have a permit. To have a permit, it takes 9 months in this country. Or they may say some of the materials lead times are so and so, or we do not have the resources or the abilities or capabilities of performing certain work. That's the feedback loop. So it has to start at the beginning, and it has to also continue throughout the long process of a project and program. Okay, we do not want to escalate only when we have a problem. That's reactive. We want to escalate when we are proactive. So that's the feedback loop, and I can make other examples if you wish. Raju, thanks. Thanks to you. And we have another question, which is, I think, is a very, very important question that all of you may well consider. It's the funding issue. Now, I do not know how any of you are actually functioning, but CapEx funding is important because it sets the whole tone for strategic investment. But I would say the OpEx is the most challenging one because budgets are set. And whoever has set the budget with top management has certainly fought through many, many meetings to get that budget set. Now, how do you set a budget to maintain and sustain your operation whilst having to do continuous improvement? Because a lot of projects are in continuous improvement, by the way. So think about when you are developing your budgeting at the OPEX level, to state to management, these are the things that we would like to add to sustain and maintain and even innovate our current operations so that the funding is known and can be released. Else you're stuck. Think about that. Do we have any more questions out there? Do we have any more people out there? I thank you for your attention. You'll be getting, of course, the whole set of slides. I have one from Josefino. What to do if to change would rate Fimbo with, well, that's a nice question, Josefino. Is it Josefino or Josefina? Don't forget it. Yes, well, obviously, any change is going to have to consider resistance to change. Okay. Now, when you say different people, I would think different people are doing different pieces of work in the organization. Well, that's a major challenge. So more time has to be spent when individuals, through stakeholder analysis, first of all, you'll be able to see which individuals are going to be reticent from one side to positive and engaging on the other side. So that's the first thing that you have to do to be able to determine where are people going to be participating. Now, the other thing will be that the employees who will be receiving the change, when you have to change something, you're going to be reskilling people, retooling environments. How much time do we spend to understand what are the challenges and issues they have of changing their jobs? And how much time do we spend to be able to prepare them for their jobs? The biggest challenge is organizational readiness. Can we ready the organization for the change? And sometimes we go so fast, we leave a lot of people behind. So take that time, identify the individuals, and take the process with the people. And sometimes you're going to change what you wanted to do in the first place. It's a lot of things. I invite you to the seminar in end of September if you want to talk more about it. So I've got another question here. What are the best practices to link strategy with budget to make sure resource availability? There are no best practices. The practices are very difficult because you talk about resource availability. Now, capacity planning, okay, is basically what you're talking about here. I usually make an example about car manufacturers. And let me give you the example. It might give you an idea of where I'm going here. You want to have a Mercedes-Benz, nice cars, okay? So somewhere just near Sindelfingen, that is not very far from Stuttgart, they have a very large manufacturing plant. And what's going to happen, they will tell you exactly in what week, what day your red car will come out. They have an extraordinary capacity planning system. Now, in our organization where we're dealing with human resources availability, I've never seen that. I mean, I've seen it about 35 years ago when I used to work with these large corporations, when everybody used to be treated like a personnel number. But in order for us to be able to answer your question, each department, not HR, each department needs to have its resource capacity plan from its headcount by skill sets, talking about human resources here, and what kind of ongoing work they're doing, which is operational, how much work do they have available for potential projects of change. So these are all mapped. Every program or project that needs to be launched needs to have a high level resource requirements, and the two are mapped over a period of time. Now, there are small ways of doing that, but it needs before that an engagement of the organization to want to have to capture for human resources at a day-to-day level, week-to-week level, month-to level, by capacity level, what are the current ongoing work to be performed and what is therefore their resulting availability. It happens in islands. I got a question how to handle resistance. Nice question. Okay, you can try a Kalashnikov, but that's not going to work because there are rules against that. There are techniques, as I just mentioned before. You have to address why resistance exists. You have to understand that there's a normal and natural reaction that all of us have, resistance to change. And going to the root causes would be how do people get away from what are called the comfort zones. And the resistance to change is to address that comfort zone so that people can slowly move to another comfort zone. So sometimes it requires more training, adequate reorganization, and it may well be that other people won't go through the change much faster, and the social group takes them along. There's resistance through to conflict management, where individuals don't agree with the way to go. So that has to be through a discussion and getting a win-win situation or some form of discussions which arise at a consensus. There are many ways of doing it, but your question, I think, is best answered by saying, take the time to address what I would call these sociological and psychological issues, because they are the ones that create the most obstacles in achieving organizational goals. What else we got here? Would like to get info about your next seminar dates in Dubai. That's a good one. I may suggest that you contact Informa. There are, if you can contact Informa at mea.com, and you will see I have a few seminars that I'm running. There'll be some. In fact, next week, if you want to come to our strategic project management course in July and September. This particular seminar, Organizational Goals, will be run in September. There are about 2 or 3 seminars I have in October, November, and December of a multitude of of topics centered around change and projects. I advise you to go on the website of Informa, and I'm sure that someone will guide you to the appropriate person who can tell you what is the best course for you. Anyway, I'm sure that after this webinar, with the email, you will be bombarded with some emails, don't worry. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I see we're still 23 out there. I'd like to thank you all. I think we've come to nearly 55 minutes, which may be a record. I don't know. And I think we should stop. Thank you very much. And I wish you all the best. And I hope to see most of you, if not all of you, physically. Have a good day. Goodbye.